Welcome to Taiwan Talks on tour in Japan. I'm Rath Wang. We're here at the National Diet, Japan's parliament, to speak with a longtime friend of Taiwan, current Minister of Justice Suzuki Keisuke. Let's hear what the minister has to say in terms of how Japan can boost support for Taiwan, both legally and in terms of maintaining regional peace and security. Thank you very much for your time today, Minister. Minister Suzuki has been to Taiwan dozens of times and also chairs the ruling party LDP's Taiwan Policy Review Project. He previously served as Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Deputy Minister for Finance. Minister, at the Katagalan Forum in 2022, you, alongside former Minister Kono Taro, talked about creating a legal framework and providing more support for peace in the Taiwan Strait and also making the region safer. Can you talk about that from a Taiwan perspective?
From the viewpoint of Japanese government, how to keep the status quo or the stability in this region would be the really important issue and very critical issue. And it really directly connected to our own national security issue. So that we Japanese or Japanese government are really committing on how to keep the status quo, how to prevent a kind of the change of the status quo by force by anybody. So in that context, we Japan would like to dedicate many of our efforts to do that, to achieve to that goal.
In terms of achieving that goal, what kind of specific actions is the Japanese government taking?
One is how to guarantee Taiwan's existence in international community. For instance, like how to keep the observer's position in WHO or the ICAO or that kind of the international organization is one of the efforts that Japanese government had.
Do you see more pressure from China coming in terms of exerting pressure on Taiwan?
So many said there had been a change of that kind of the pressure. There are many rumors. We don't want to evaluate each that kind of the rumor speculators, but at least Japanese basic our position is to guarantee Taiwan's existence or Taiwan's space in international community.
In your role as Minister of Justice, what do you see in terms of providing support to Taiwan in terms of its international status, participation in these organizations, and also maintaining the status quo? Do you see how your ministry works with other ministries, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of Defense?
So what our ministry can do? In that context, we are now playing a kind of the key role in diplomacy on like rule of law. And
such as in the seas and say with the Philippines.
So as a principle, it's because in each practical issue is conducted by other ministries. So as Minister of Justice, we are promoting that kind of the rule of law or the how to put this East Asian area under the control of rule of law. And that includes that we would not allow any kind of the challenge by anyone to change the status quo by force. And that's one of the point. And the other point is that our ministry is in charge of those border control or the acceptance of foreigners to our country like that. So in that context, we should prepare for any kind of the potential risks. And certainly we are watching carefully about the Chinese military behavior around our territory, like East China Sea or Taiwan Strait or South China Sea. And we understand that the tension is now getting higher and higher, especially in this year. And we are expecting this tension could getting much higher next year. And for protecting the safety, security of this country or the people in this country, we need to prepare for any kind of the contingency.
In terms of contingencies, the Taiwan contingency has been a big word in Japan and also echoed by the former late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. What do you say to that in terms of Chinese action, say in August with the air incursion, with the Chinese spy plane flying into Japanese airspace?
So, frankly speaking, the phrase that the Taiwan contingency is contingency of Japan, actually, that phrase, I were mentioned to that phrase in, I think in April of 2000 something, and on that December, I think that the Prime Minister Abe-san mentioned about that, and it became very, very popular. Actually, so in the context, I totally share that view. And from that viewpoint, I think that the current Chinese military behavior in many cases is seen as kind of the big threat, direct, immediate, or physical threat for Japan itself also. So not only for maybe Taiwan, but also for Japan, it is a really serious situation. So we as a country, we need to protect our own national interests. And it would directly correlate it to the action in a possible Taiwan contingency. But it's not our, become kind of the real contingency yet. So what we can do is to prepare for the possible situation.
Can you talk about how that's actually being carried out in terms of preparations? Are there talks with Taiwan and are there talks with other allies to make sure that that doesn't happen or increase deterrence?
Actually, I was involved to that process a lot, so I cannot mention about those kind of I cannot point out any kind of the real process or issues. Yeah.
And as the lead of the LDP's Taiwan policy review team, can you talk a bit about what Taiwan means for Japan from a national security standpoint?
So, for instance, our the land, our island on our west end, Yonaguni, is very close to Taiwan. Actually, the distance is like 140 kilometers, like that. And for instance, in the military drill by PLA, after the visit to Taiwan by Chairperson Pelosi, those maybe quite big number of those missiles launched by PLA was landed to the Japanese. It's easy. And so that that kind of the issue really make us understand that those kind of the military action would harm our own national security directly, immediately. So those two issues would be linked in that kind of manner.
Given how close Taiwan is, and you talked about these potential scenarios, what are Japanese priorities specifically when it comes to Taiwan now?
As nation states, we need to secure our own people and secure our land, our national interest. That is the top priority of Japanese diplomacy or the Japanese policy. That is, I think, that the principle in every country or every government, I think. And in that context, we are seeing or calculating how can we secure our own national interest. And many are mentioned about the line that Japanese national security or the national interest is really correlated to all the kind of the existence of Taiwan safely in current status quo.
Moving on to the US, what do you say to the U.S. Japan alliance when it comes to another president? Do you feel it could change into a different form, or do you feel there's anything that we need to look out?
So, of course, the U.S. Japan alliance is quite to have the long history, right? And had, how to say, adjusted for the circumstances every time. So I think that this U.S.-Japan alliance would adjust for the current situation again, and I don't have big concern on it.
Has Taiwan been more of a part of that discussion when it comes to the U.S. and Japan coming together?
So of course, the point is that Japan is existing in East Asia, and Taiwan is next to Japan, and Japan really need its stability of this region. And in that context, Japan and also US don't want to allow any kind of the situation that some country will try to change the status quo by force. That is the situation that we cannot accept or allow. Yeah.
So specifically, how do you see deterrence in its best form?
So of course, the deterrence always is kind of related to the situation of how the leader of each country is calculating and how the communication among the leaders are taken. So those issues are the key to activate the deterrence.
And that includes Taiwan's leaders as well, you believe?
I think so. And of course, I understand the current situation is that the Taiwanese people really worry about the Chinese military policy. Not only me, but also the Japanese, many of the people, government official, or the US people. I think US government understand it. And so how to activate the deterrence to avoid that kind of the situation would become the national interest of not only Taiwan, but also Japan or the US. That is our way of thinking. And we want to expand the partners that can share those kind of views.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let's now talk about the U.S.-Japan alliance and why it's actually very much about Taiwan. I'm here in Roppongi, Tokyo at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. With me here is the Institute's Executive Vice President, Michishita Narushige. Professor Michishita also served as Assistant Counselor in the Japanese government's cabinet and was a Senior Fellow at the Ministry of Defense's Research Institute. Thank you very much for your time today, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've said many people think that the U.S.-Japan alliance is there to defend Japan, but that's not really true. The most important military objectives of the alliance is to defend South Korea and Taiwan. Can you talk about what that actually means from a Taiwan perspective?
Japan is committed to the defense of Taiwan, which means if there is a conflict across the Taiwan Strait, Japan would do two things. One is to provide main important operating bases for the U.S. forces fighting for Taiwan. That's first one. And the other one is Japan would, if the Japanese Prime Minister decides, would commit its armed forces called self-defense forces to the defense of Taiwan and have those forces fight with the U.S. forces for the defense of Taiwan. It's going to be a big war. China has a large number of missiles. China has a massive naval capabilities. China has a large number of aircraft. And so Japan will be committing Air Force, Navy, and ground forces.
Even though it's called the Self-Defense Forces, in actuality, it's a full-fledged defense or military.
Japan is the 10th largest spender on defense in the world, according to the think tank based in Sweden named Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. So it's a big military power in the world.
You've also mentioned that Japan's decision to almost double its defense budget makes sense because it takes care of two theaters of operations now. In addition to the Korean Peninsula, there is now maintaining peace in the Taiwan Strait.
The U.S.-Japan alliance, the roles of that and Japanese role, defense role, have evolved. And so during the Cold War, it was about defending against the Soviet Union. After the end of the Cold War, our focus shifted away from the Soviet Union, which was gone already, toward the Korean Peninsula. And then our scope of defense have expanded to the Taiwan Strait. So now we have both the defense of or security on the Korean Peninsula and the security across the Taiwan Strait. Those are the objectives, important objectives of the U.S.-Japan alliance or Japanese security policy.
So in terms of Japanese security policy, the increase is actually justified because of the rising threat and the rising action we see from China in terms of being aggressive towards Taiwan.
Now we are taking care of the Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait. So there are two theaters to take care of. So it's only natural for Japan to double or at least significant, not necessarily double. It depends on how you calculate, but it's only natural for Japan to significantly increase its defense expenditure.
And do you see that increasing even more in the future?
Possibly, but the problem is there is a limit to what Japan can do. Japan has a huge government debt, which is amounts to more than 200% of its GDP, gross domestic product. So certainly, Japan will not be able to keep expanding its defense capabilities, but for the time being, it is doing its best.
Speaking of Japanese spending, how much stress could a second Trump administration put in terms of Japan's defense spending, given Trump's words of having Japan pay more for U.S. troops and U.S. facilities, military facilities in Japan?
Yeah, so there are two things that he might talk about. One is to increase defense expenditure, and the two is to increase what's called host nation support, which is a sort of a financial support that Japan provides to the U.S. forces stationed in Japan. And in terms of the first one, so we are trying to increase our defense expenditure up to 2% of GDP. But some people say Trump might ask Japan to increase this to 3% instead of 2%. That's a big rise. So I don't think we'll be able to do it. But anyway, he might ask us. And in the first Trump administration, Trump asked Japan to increase the host nation support by, fourfold. So that was a big, demand, and Japan didn't do that. And but he might say the same thing again. But I don't think it will happen. But anyways, Japan has decided to increase its defense budget already significantly. So with what we are doing, we will try to persuade Mr. Trump, and I think we'll be able to do that successfully.
Trump is seen as a negotiator. From your experience and your expertise, what do you see as a reasonable amount where Japan can come at the negotiating table and have Trump agree to that?
What's important is real defense capabilities rather than simply the money, right? So if you increase the defense budget too quickly, the money might not be used effectively, right? You cannot just increase the number of people easily. You cannot, start buying too many weapons at the same time, because production capacity is limited, right? And the world is talking about, all the countries are now trying to produce more weapons, so there is a capacity limit. So I think, if we explain those things to Mr. Trump, he will certainly understand.
You talked about the re-election of Trump in the context of his uncertainty, and when it comes to China, that actually could deter China from taking risky or abrasive behavior. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so there is a kind of good news and bad news. Bad news first. Trump is unpredictable, and he has already said if China attacked Taiwan, the U.S. or he would raise the tariff to 200 vis-a-vis China to 200%, right? So that would be painful to China. But without really committing U.S. armed forces to defending Taiwan, it'd be almost impossible, even with 200% tariff, to prevent China from taking Taiwan, right? So that those remarks are sort of it's scary, to be honest. But at the same time, there is a good news, which is that Mr. Trump is quite unpredictable to us, right? But Mr. Trump is quite unpredictable to China as well. So if you are, if I were a Chinese leader, if I decide to attack Taiwan tomorrow, if I see Mr. Trump in the White House, I would think twice.
In terms of the bad news, you also did sound alarmed that Donald Trump could reduce U.S. commitment to defending Taiwan and South Korea. Does that present an opportunity for Taiwan to work closer with its neighbors and close ally, Japan?
Yeah, certainly. Countries in the region have, expects more difficult, security environment. So already we are talking. Japan is working very closely with South Korea. We are working very closely with Southeast Asian countries. We are working very closely with Australia. We are working closely with India and other countries in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's a good news that in a way, advent of second Trump administration is bringing the nations in this region together. And certainly in time, we should start talking to Taiwan and start working much more closely together.
What does that mean in terms of starting to work with Taiwan and work closer? Specifically, do you see certain actions that could happen between Taiwan and Japan?
Yeah, so actually, currently, the U.S. and Japan are formulating what's called the Operation Plan, which is colloquially called War Plan, which is a plan, detailed plan how to fight a war across the Taiwan Strait. And so we are, almost finishing, putting an end to the process. And so if we have a plan, then upon that, ultimately this is about defending or defense of Taiwan. So we should involve Taiwan in the discussion, right? So we will be in, it's a great timing, and timing is good, and environment is ripe for us to start talking to Taiwan and include Taiwan more deeply in our defense planning and preparations.
To actually have Taiwan come to the table and talk to
I think so.
the Japan armed forces in that sense.
Yeah, so certainly there are diplomatic sensitivities or political sensitivities involved in such an action, so we have to be careful, and we have to do a good job of not really, how to say, offending China unnecessarily, right? And China might actually use such an action as an excuse to take a more coercive action. So we should be careful, but in a discreet way, we should be doing, cooperating more closely together.
Professor Michishita, as an insider with the government and also with the military, do you see any smart way that this can be achieved?
Yeah, certainly. So already, for example, retired military officers, Japanese officers, have been, engaging with the Taiwanese counterpart, and there are many party-to-party interactions. Sometimes U.S., Japan, Taiwan, trilateral talks. And so we will be able to use a track 1.5 or track 2, whatever, a combination of official and unofficial dialogue channels to make it politically more acceptable.
Thank you very much for your time, Professor.
I want competition with China, not conflict.
The entire world has great interest in keeping Taiwan's chip industry functional.
So the silicon shield that supposedly has been protecting Taiwan.
How many years the TSMC can still maintain its competitive edge?
What do you see as the next big shift in the semiconductor industry?
Taiwan's take on global headlines. All that matters, Taiwan Plus.